Hello, I'm Lucy. I'm the early years dietitian, and I am here tonight from a very wet and windy UK with actually rather large hair tonight. And I'm here to talk to you to answer a very common question from many of the parents that I work with. And that is, why does my child eat a food one day and then not another? Now, there are so many answers to this question, but I'm going to give you the 5 main things that I come across a lot. So the first thing I want you to think about is sometimes children are just not hungry. And rather than trying to explain to you that they're not hungry and really having the words or knowing what it is that they don't want it, they just tell you, yuck, I don't like it, I don't want it. And remember, we all have those foods, and particularly when it comes to a fussy eater and a child, they're going to have foods that they really love, some they think are okay, some they don't like, some they hate. Now, there's going to be some foods on that list that they would eat if they were really hungry, but not if they're not that hungry. So that might be your first reason. They're just simply not hungry enough. And then moving on from that, it's a slightly different thing, but along the same vein. They just might not be able to yet communicate to you why they don't want something, okay? And we're going to dig into some of that a little bit more in a second. But if they just don't know why they don't want it, or they just don't fancy it, again, it's so much easier for a young child to just say, yuck, I don't like it, I don't want it, that's not what I want, than to really be able to find the communication skills and the right way to tell you why they don't want something. It doesn't make it any less frustrating, but that is a reason why. The third reason that we see is that there may be differences in the food that you are not noticing that your child does. The example that I always use is something like a spaghetti bolognese. It's a fairly everyday food for us in the UK. It's probably one of the first things that gets mentioned when I ask what type of foods children eat. Now, to you and I, if we went in any Italian restaurant, potentially, we would recognise bolognese as bolognese, okay? But to a young child, and particularly to a fussy eater, those foods are classed as different foods. So the bolognese that you make at home, as opposed to grandma's or nursery or school or your local Italian, there'll all be variations of a bolognese, but your child will view it differently. And sometimes that is why this happens. And it may well be that even if you're making the same food at home, you've cooked the meat for slightly longer, you've chopped the onions slightly differently, you've used red onion instead of white onion, you've used slightly different pasta, the pasta's been cooked for a slightly different number of minutes. There are so many variations, and things that you might not pick up on, your child might do, because there are so many different sensory differences in the foods that we eat that your child might pick up on something that you haven't on that day. So that is another reason. Another reason is that the environment or their day may have been different. So on some days, if your child has had a really good day, there's not been any sensory overwhelm, it's calm at home, you or dad or whoever is feeding them is feeling calm, there's not been any telling off or anything like that, your child might come to the table and be much more willing to eat a food. If though they've had a tough day at nursery, they're a little bit tired, the washing machine's on, you and dad have had an argument, or whatever it is that has triggered some kind of overwhelm or different feeling in your child, they may come to the dinner table and find it more difficult to eat food on that day. Now, this comes back to that communication thing again, that a child is not likely to sit down and say, I feel overwhelmed today, I don't feel able to eat it. They're just going to say, yuck, I don't want it, no, not tonight, I want something else. That is often a big player. And then the final thing, and something that parents often forget about, is maybe they just don't fancy it. So have you ever had a conversation with your partner or a friend or a flatmate, anything like that over the years, where you've discussed what you're having for dinner, someone's made a suggestion and you've said, oh, I just don't fancy that. Or you've come home and something's been made and you're like, I'm really sorry, but I just can't eat that tonight. I fancy this, and you've made yourself a piece of toast or something like that. That is also applicable to children. And we allow ourselves the right to kind of say, I'm not eating that, I'm having this. But we do expect our children to fall into line. Now, I'm not saying you should offer your child an alternative. Definitely not. And if you do any of my courses or you work with me on a one-to-one basis, you will know that I will tell you the things and how you approach this, and you do it differently. But I do want you to acknowledge that your child is going to have days where they just don't fancy what we're putting in front of them. So that's my 5 reasons why your child might eat something one day and not another. Hopefully you found it useful. If you have, give the channel a follow, come and find me on Instagram. You can find blogs on my website, and generally have a look and see how I can help you. Have a marvellous day.